Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar series themed COVID-19 and Insights from the Humanities, Social Sciences and IKS, Perspectives from the Global South. My name is Professor Pamela Maseko, the Executive Dean of the Humanities Faculty at Northwest University. Our agenda for this webinar series is captured in the question posed by Dr. Jess Auerbach in the article she wrote for the University World. And welcome to our webinar series themed COVID-19 and Insights from the Humanities, Social Sciences and IKS, Perspectives from the Global South. Our agenda for the webinar series is captured in the question posed by Dr. Jess Auerbach in the article she wrote for the University World News of 7 May 2020. She states that COVID-19 poses serious questions to our societies that we need to address with the same agency that our colleagues in the medical sciences are applying to care for the sick. At the heart of our disciplines is the basic question of how do we respond to living in a changed world. We are privileged to have Dr. Jess Auerbach as one of the panelists today, and we're certain that she and the rest of the panelists will engage with this question in one way or the other in their inputs. Today's webinar is titled Language Matters, Social and Linguistic Shifts During the Time of COVID-19 Pandemic. I trust that our discussions, in addition to looking at the communicative function of the language, will also address issues of the cognitive value of the language. In the context of the global linguistic and cultural diversity, how do societies communicate about COVID-19? What are the linguistic shifts experienced as a result? Given that there are numerous social behaviors that need to be taken into account in restraining the spread of the virus, what are the shifts in socio-cultural behavior of societies? How do these reflect the society's engagement with the phenomenon of COVID-19? This webinar series is a third in the series. So if Paul, if you can fly to this for me on the screen now. This is a third in the series of these webinars. The first webinar addressed the history of disease and healing in Africa, and how Africa dealt with this long before contact with Europe. The second webinar looked at the matter of intellectual property rights, especially in the context of indigenous knowledge systems in Africa. We had fascinating speakers from Department of Science and Innovation, Namibia Institute for Science and Technology, and Matisebo Institute. The next three webinars will address therapeutics and etiology, gender dynamics, and community engagement, respectively, all in the context of COVID-19. One of the most important objectives of the webinar series is to establish and maintain meaningful collaborations, not only across the disciplines, but across institutions and scholars within the continent and the diaspora. This now requires me to acknowledge our collaborations, our collaborators in this series. We're collaborating with the Human Sciences faculty from the Namibia University of Technology, as well as IKS Center of Faculty of Natural and Agricultural Sciences at Northwest University. I also wish to acknowledge our valuable partner, Dr. Zulumatabo Zulu from the Matisebo Institute. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Dean of Human Sciences at NUST, Professor Alina Zahube, and her colleagues from NUST, our faculty colleagues, as well as participants from across the world. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. Lastly, but most importantly, I wish to acknowledge and thank our panelists for the day, Professor Sarala Krishnamurti from NUST, Dr. Jess Auerbach from Northwest University, and Professor Sinfri Makoni, an old colleague from Penn State University and Northwest University, not old in the sense of age. I also want to acknowledge Mr. Ashwin Berry, who's our performing artist for the day, and the facilitator, Ms. Anneke Butler, and SD Hefayordaan, who will be doing the closing remarks. The facilitator will introduce the panelists later. From my side, I just wish to thank you for acknowledging our invitation and look forward to your presentation. Before I go any further, let me take a few moments and make an announcement with regards to the communication etiquette during the session. The program starts with 10 minutes presentation from each of the panelists where they make position statements or talk to their topics. This will be followed by a 40-minute question and answer session. And you are required to use the Q&A button to post any questions or comments during the presentations that they will be making. So please do this while the seminar is in progress. Please note that the chat function has been disabled and therefore you will only be able to post questions through the Q&A button. Lastly, let me introduce the facilitator for the day, Ms. Anneke Butler. Ms. Anneke Butler is a lecturer in the academic literacy program at the Northwest University. She joined Northwest University in 2012 after a diverse career in language teaching, management of an environmental NGO, and educational publishing. In 2014, she received the award for the best MA student in Afrikaans from the School of Languages, and in 2015 was awarded the Marius Jooste Medal for the best study in Afrikaans. She is currently enrolled for a PhD in language testing. At present, her teaching involvement includes modules in critical and analytical thinking, as well as Afrikaans linguistics. She also presents workshops on postgraduate academic writing. Colleagues, thank you very much all for attending the webinar. I'm certain that it will draw as much debate as the last two webinars. Let me now hand over to Ms. Anneke Butler. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Pam, and welcome to everyone. It's an honor to facilitate this afternoon's webinar on social and linguistic shifts during the time of the COVID pandemic. If we can quickly just talk about to establish common ground on how we will listen, ask questions, and receive feedback from the participants. I will introduce each panelist first, and before his or her presentation, and you are welcome to ask questions in the chat function during the presentations. We will listen to all three presentations first, and then the artistic piece before I will relate the questions from you to the panelists. You could see now on the screen that you could use the chat function at the bottom. Everyone happy? Yes, so during the presentation, you can start to ask the questions that you would love the panelist or the speaker, the presenters to answer. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce to you Prof. Sarala Krishnamurti. She's the former Dean of the Faculty of Human Sciences at the Namibia University of Science and Technology. Prof. Krishnamurti co-edited the book Writing Namibia, Literature in Transition in 2018 with Ms. Helen Vale. Writing Namibia has received very positive reviews from scholars globally. Prof. Krishnamurti received the Researcher of the Year Awards in the Faculty of Human Sciences at NUST in 2011 and 2012. She received funding from the Institutional Research and Publications Committee for 5 years to work on various projects. Additional funding for the ISNAM project from the National Council of Research, Science and Technology, funding from Basler Africa Biographian, Switzerland to work on the Herero Genocide Project, and the European Union to protect, preserve, and promote indigenous culture and languages are some of the research contributions of Prof. Krishnamurti. Prof. Sarala, we would love to hear your talk on COVID-19 in Namibia, an opportunity for linguistic and cultural revitalization of Indigenous people, a case study of the Kung. I would listen to hear if I pronounced that correctly. Over to you, Prof. Sarala.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. A special good afternoon to colleagues from Northwest and from South Africa. It is a pleasure to be engaging with people across the region. I would like to begin by thanking Professor Alina Sehobie, the Dean of the Faculty of Human Sciences, for inviting me to present at this webinar. And of course, I have chosen to speak about the Kung. Last Thursday, Dr. Zulu pointed out the importance of culture and language as tools of communication in the times of COVID-19. His final statements provide me with the perfect segue to introduce what I'm about to say this afternoon. As we speak in Namibia today, we have 4,665 number of cases of COVID-19 with 2,426 recoveries and 39 deaths. The President, His Excellency Dr. Hage Geingob, has reversed the lockdown from stage 4 to stage 3 in several regions of Namibia. The fast spread of the coronavirus due to ignorance or the irresponsible and negligent behavior of some citizens is alarming, to say the least, and has the potential to engulf the whole country. The statistics that I presented to you may look very small when compared to the US, Brazil, India, and South Africa, where the numbers have shot through the roof. But we must not forget that we have a very small population, and healthcare services are not sufficiently developed or organized to cater for all the people in our country. Further, it must be remembered that a significant number of our ethnic and indigenous people are simply cut off from what happens in the rest of Namibia. When I was asked to present a paper at this webinar, I conducted a quick search on COVID-19 in Google Scholar, and I came across nearly 29,000 publications from the fields of medicine, healthcare, ethnobiology, pharmaceutics, epidemiology, and other scientific fields. Digging further, I found some articles on the socio-economic impact of the pandemic, the psychosocial aspects of the behavior of humans affected by the coronavirus, and some articles on ethnobiology focusing on the use of indigenous medicines in combating the virus. Most studies on the indigenous medicines were from Australia, South America, Canada, India, Southeast Asia, but there were very few publications when I searched using the keywords language, culture, indigenous knowledge, and COVID-19. This confirms what I've always suspected, that we in human sciences are not investigating COVID-19 from our perspective. I believe it is very critical for us in our faculties to explore the human aspects of this pandemic. Instead of considering the pandemic as a threat, which it is, and I would not deny it in my wildest dreams, my plea is to regard positively the opportunity it affords us. We have an opening to conduct research in linguistic diversity, multiculturalism, media, gender, and other related fields using interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary approaches. Now we have a chance to seek answers in indigenous knowledge. We should assign a greater worth to the indigenous people of Namibia for the promotion and preservation of their knowledge. We will thus speak to the values of equity, equality, and access that are enshrined in our language policy and bring about inclusivity of ethnic groups for self-determination to strengthen their identity and pride in their culture. The pandemic has shown us that it is quite possible for socio-economic systems to be suspended almost in synchrony globally. If technological advances can make the planet into one global village, the pandemic has reduced the whole world to a level playing field. Now we are all working towards the same goal, with many different countries racing against time to find the wonder drug to fight the coronavirus. It is inevitable that each country grapples with the pandemic in their own way, depending upon their socioeconomic status and the resources available to them. What research we do here in Namibian institutions can make a difference to the lives of the indigenous people living here and influence global perceptions. In a study done on indigenous communities in Bangladesh, it was found that they have cultural components that help them tackle any situation. Unique behavior patterns and distancing habits, related to family and social structures, village constructs, celebration, worship, traditional rituals, and cultural practices all contribute towards self-isolation that we city dwellers could learn from. When we talk about science, we tend to think about Occidental paradigms of development, but we forget that we can find a rich body of knowledge and treatments in the indigenous knowledge systems. Let me now turn to the indigenous communities of Namibia. Again, I would like to present a few statistics to provide a perspective to this talk. According to the 2019 UNESCO figures, 40% of the world languages are in danger of extinction, with majority of them being indigenous. They're recognized in UN instruments as representatives of much of the biological, linguistic, and cultural diversity of the world. Indigenous people form 20% of the world population and are responsible for 80% of the world's forests and natural environment. They are the custodians of the ecosystems and natural guardians of the flora and fauna of the landscape because they have a greater understanding of it. Unfortunately, the crisis of COVID-19 has affected indigenous people in debilitating ways. Why do I emphasize the significance of indigenous languages? It is because language, culture, and traditional medicines are closely intertwined. And if one dies, there is no hope for the other two to survive. Medicinal plants which grow in the veldt have names only known to the indigenous people. If the language dies, disappear along with the information. Language death can lead to whole communities being wiped out of existence. Let me take the example with the Kung people of Namibia. I'm sorry I'm not able to pronounce the click. I wouldn't dare to attempt it. They form a part of the San community and are not recognized as a different ethnic group. It must be noted that there are 6 or 7 San languages characterized by the clicks, which we are all familiar with, even though we can neither articulate them accurately nor understand them. These languages are not dialects, but independent languages and mutually non-intelligible. The Jutwansi are the dominant group among the San. A quick search in the Namibian Statistics Agency website, Wikipedia, and even Ethnologue, a website which collects data on world languages, reveals a startling gap of information with regard to the Kung. This is not to say that other San languages are not endangered. They are, but at the moment I choose to speak about the Kung because it is one of the 3 languages that we are investigating as part of an EU-funded project called P3ICL, which is to protect, preserve, and promote indigenous culture and languages of Namibia. As I mentioned earlier, Kung does not appear on any websites, and in Ethnologue, it is listed as a synonym under Jutwansi. Let us press pause and look at this critically. This language does not even find mention in any documents. It does not figure as an endangered language as per UNESCO protocols. The fact that it is in danger of extinction is borne out by our visit to Corridor 17 and 18, which we were told had the largest concentration of the Kung. We could not get sufficient demographical details there. Further, there were only 2 Kung speakers who knew the orthography of the Kung language and therefore could interview, record, transcribe, and translate Kung cultural and linguistic expressions that we were collecting. On the second trip to a different region of Namibia where we were told we could find them, we met young Kung people who informed us that they had forgotten their language and could not speak their mother tongue because they attended schools where the medium of instruction was either Oshihirero or Setswana. The hegemony of the dominant language groups ensures the destruction of the minority languages. I would like to describe one meeting that we had with the Kung traditional leader. She was a handicapped woman of indefinite age. She told us that she would drag herself into the veldt, herbs and medicinal plants, sometimes staying there throughout the night, exposed to the cold and the danger of predators like lions which roamed in the area. She described to us the rituals and the cultural practices associated with collecting medicines, preparing, drying, grinding, and preserving them for sale. She had a thriving medical practice, if I can call it that, because members of her community visited her regularly to get medication for illnesses that bothered them. She told us proudly that she even had overseas clients. Her healing practices sustained her livelihood. I was awestruck by the depth and vigor of her knowledge and the ease with which she engaged with nature. She told us that there were specific seasons in which she could harvest the herbs, always taking care not to overharvest and deplete the veldt of an opportunity to rejuvenate itself. If the language were to die, it would be an irretrievable loss of knowledge because the names of the plants would be forgotten along with the knowledge of the herbal plants and the cultural practices associated with it. This is where I see great potential for transdisciplinary research, where linguists and scientists can work with the traditional healers, bringing in a synergy for the purpose of finding solutions to global health problems. We should be compatriots in our march against the pandemic and fight it together by drawing from indigenous knowledge systems. The scientists should test the efficacy of the medicinal herbs harvested by the San people, and we should protect their intellectual property by registering patents in their name so that they reap the economic benefits of their knowledge. In conclusion, I would like to read a couple of lines from Albert Camus' famous novel, The Plague, and he writes, and I quote, "Pestilence is so common that there have been as many plagues in the world as there have been wars. Yet wars and plagues always find people unprepared. There is great truth in what he has said. We were unprepared for the coronavirus and it has caught us off guard, but now no more. Let us work together to face this challenge." I would like to end on a positive note by reading out an announcement by the Director General of UNESCO, Audrey Azoute, and I quote, and again, this is within quotes, "I would like to declare the years 2022 to 2032 the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. I think there is hope for us." Thank you.
Let me just come back on. Thank you very much, Prof. Sarala. That was really, really informative. The next panelist that I would like to introduce to you is Dr. Jess Auerbach. I'd like to read her bio for you. Jess Auerbach is a senior lecturer in anthropology at Northwest University. She completed her undergraduate degree at the University of Cape Town and thereafter obtained a degree in forced migration and human rights law at Oxford University, and then a PhD in anthropology at Stanford. She's the author of From Water to Wine, Becoming Middle Class in Angola, published by the University of Toronto Press in 2020. Jess, we are looking forward to your presentation called Data and Distance, Thinking Through Contemporary Communication in COVID Times. Thank you, Jess.
Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for having me here. Today, I'd like to share a few simple observations about communication in COVID times, which come from the perspective of anthropology. Sometimes I find it a bit awkward being an anthropologist because of the terrible history of our discipline in the region's oppression, but I like it so much because of the methodology. It's a place that allows us to consider not only what people say, but also what they do and what they say they do as well. It allows us to think about communication within its social, political, and structural contexts. In COVID times, what are people saying? What are they doing? And how are they communicating and describing and making meaning of this completely upended reality? I'd like to make some simple observations and end with what may at first appear a radical call, but bear with me because I think it's worth attending. The first observation is that almost nobody in South Africa and Namibia or anywhere else in the world is social distancing right now. It's no accident that solitary confinement is used as a form of torture. People need people to thrive. Sociality is a critical component of our lives. So rather around the world, and especially in South Africa, what's happening is that some of us have been able to shift our sociality online, but others have not. Some of us have been able to connect via the internet for work, for religion, for commerce, for exercise, and even for synchronous meals with those we love. Our care for one another sustained and communicated via the almost mystical conduits of fiber optic internet cables. For Southern Africa's comfortable classes, the mechanisms of our communications have shifted, absolutely, but its substance has in most cases remained largely the same. Rather than being socially distant, we are in fact tightly connected, but the materiality of that connection is worth examining. According to a 2018 study, just 10.4% of South African households have uncapped internet at home. That means that for 90% of the population, the internet is far from an everyday, every moment reality. Instead, it is a service that is expensive, unreliable, and often inaccessible because of its reliance not only on state-regulated infrastructure, such as satellites, cables, and towers, but also on personal hardware, which includes cell phones and laptops. In January 2020, the internet might have felt like a luxury item. However, in COVID times, access to the internet has proven to literally be what may separate us all from life or death, to be safely or to be unsafely human. Being able to be physically distant while maintaining connection has emerged as the single thing that will keep us all okay, not only from COVID, but also from the host of mental conditions that fallout from the end of life as we have known it is currently unleashing. In a collapsing economy, the internet enables job searches as well as access to food parcels. It enables community support, municipal intervention. More than that, it allows us to connect with the people who we love who might be far away, to visit them without being physically present, via cell phones, and to see with our own eyes that Madala's walking okay, that mom's remembering to take her medicine, that our nieces, our nephews are completing their homework or doing their chores. When proximity becomes dangerous more than ever, we need to trust that our loved ones are okay. And seeing is important for believing, for grief, for joy, for the rituals not only of death, but also of living. I know that in this time of austerity and IMF loans, of grand corruption and hunger and fear, asking for something for free might be met with a lack of enthusiasm. I understand that infrastructure is costly and great profits stand to be made or interrupted. Yet I think this brings to focus the heart of the question of the new South Africa. What kind of a nation are we, and who do we want to become? Are we a nation ever divided or united towards some kind of common goals? Are we a country in which people die quietly of starvation and loneliness? Or are we a country that is capable of communication, understanding, of love, and of care? And care, after all, has been the core of the Northwest University's strategic response to COVID-19. If we dream of a nation that is connected, we have to treat connection as an urgent national good. In the same way that water, food, and shelter are fundamental rights of the 20th century guaranteed in our constitution, surely in the 21st century, the century of knowledge economy, data and the connections that data enables must become a human right too. If free and fast data were made possible for all South Africans, all Namibians, all Africans, we could minimize risk while still maximizing contributions to economic activity. We could find new ways to stay distant, but be together as we develop new rituals and ways of working and of learning. Importantly, all of our bodies would be acknowledged as equally worthy of protection, and all of our minds acknowledged as equally worthy of expansion through digital doors. But without those doors being opened through public access to data, most South Africans are left stranded at the gate. So colleagues, I leave you with this question. As academics whose job is to open the gates of knowledge for our students, what are we doing in COVID times to make that happen? How are we ensuring that equity in classrooms where the inequity of the country that we live in has simply transposed itself into digital spaces? How are we building bridges not only through our teaching, but through our listening to our students? And having listened the questions we ourselves, with the power that we do have as intellectuals in the spaces of universities, then ask our leaders and our policymakers. What does it take to sustain not only biophysical, but social and communal life in COVID times? I leave you with the suggestion that alongside food, shelter, warmth, and water, the gateway that uncapped data represents must be one we all push open. It will take work as institutions and as individuals to ensure the playing field is leveled in this way. But we must acknowledge that human beings are much more than physical bodies whose bare life must be merely sustained. In addition to sustenance, our communication must be enabled, opened, and expanded. We need not only new language, but new ways of hearing, seeing, and sharing it. I thank you so much for your time and attention and the opportunity to participate in this very important dialogue.
Thank you very much. It was lovely to listen to you, Jess. The third and last panelist that I would like to introduce to you is Prof. Sinfree Makoni. Now, Prof. Sinfree was born in Zimbabwe and holds a BA and honors degree in English with linguistics from the University of Ghana, Legon, Accra. He holds a PhD in applied linguistics from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. He has held a number of professional appointments in South Africa, including at the University of the Western Cape and the University of Cape Town. He currently is, and we are very pleased to say that, an extraordinary professor at the University of Northwest, and is also an Andrew Carnegie African Diaspora Fellow at the Laikipia University in Kenya. In the United States, in the Department of Applied and Linguistics program, he teaches in Africa Studies at Pennsylvania State University. He has published extensively in decolonial integrational linguistics, colonial linguistics, and language policy and planning. Prof. Sinfree, we gladly listen to your talk, Multiple Perspectives on COVID-19, Language Research, Learning to the Future. Thank you.
I would like to thank Professor Maseko and colleagues at the University of the Northwest for inviting me to talk about language matters and issues about COVID-19 leaning towards the future. I would like to argue that the COVID-19 provides us with an opportunity to reconfigure the nature of the language research agenda in applied linguistics. I start off from the premise, which I call a maximalist view of applied linguistics, that there is no social problem or there is no medical problem for which there is no applied linguistics research methodology. So any medical problem is an applied linguistics challenge. And that's what I'll be trying to illustrate in my discussion. The issue of addressing COVID-19 and language echoes some of the previous studies that we were carrying out in the early 2000s on HIV and language. So this won't be the first time that applied linguists have been confronted with the challenges of addressing issues about pandemics and applied linguistics. The general tendency, however, in my research, in my own career, and those of us who work on the intersection of language and health, has been that we have tended to shift, and I think rightly so, from biomedical approaches, and we are more inclined to adopt sociolinguistic and anthropologically oriented approaches to COVID-19. When we adopt sociolinguistic and anthropological oriented approaches to COVID-19 or any other epidemic, we are interested in a number of different phenomena. One of the phenomena that we are interested in such situations would be an analysis, for example, of the nature of the language practices by government officials as they try and communicate with their citizens. So, for example, in the South African case, that would involve analyzing the nature of the communication between the ministers of the ministers of health when they are addressing issues about COVID-19, or the nature of the communication by the with his citizens. The role that translanguaging, language communication, and code switching takes, the role that language communication, translanguaging takes place when such communication is taking place. Then the other dimension, which is hardly mentioned, which is extremely important from an anthropological perspective, is the analysis of the lay vernacular discourses which are used by ordinary citizens as they try to make sense of the world that has been created by COVID-19. It's one thing to focus on what government officials, the Center for Disease Control say about COVID-19. What is lacking is a systematic analysis of how the lay people understand and interpret and the new terms that the lay individuals create for themselves to make sense of the COVID-19. So it is these lay vernacular discourses which have got an important bearing on how the local communities respond to the COVID-19 discourses. Another important dimension that I'm interested in consists of how the elderly individuals themselves make sense of the COVID-19 discourses. A large number of the COVID-19 discourses tend to portray the elderly as vulnerable and that they're likely to die if they've got if they contract these particular conditions. The most important thing for us to realize is that, for example, in South Africa has got about 8.7% of its population is over the age of 60. So according to the COVID-19 biomedical discourses, they can consider themselves to be at a high risk of having an adverse outcome from if for example they contract COVID-19. What is lacking, however, is an understanding or analysis of how those particular elderly individuals understand the nature of those discourses. I would like to postulate that what you have now due to COVID is an increasing accentuation of an ageistic and ableistic discourse that in actual fact undercuts the status of the elderly. Another important aspect that comes out once you begin to look at the elderly, not only as an entity separate from everybody else, but as part of an intergenerational group. We should then not only analyze communication, but try to analyze the nature of the intergenerational communication, because in most cases, most elderly individuals in Africa live in intergenerational households. And now, methodologically, what are the implications of this? The applied linguistics that I therefore propose is one that is grounded in methodology that is nimble, quick, fast, and dexterous, meaning that instead of being preoccupied with issues about reliability, validity, anthropological validity, etc., what is required is a type of methodology that can be easily adapted to address a fast-moving situation. In other words, the applied linguistics that I'm proposing here does not draw any distinction between applied linguistics and journalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sinfree. I definitely have my own question for you. That will come later. Now, all participants, we now have an opportunity to be entertained. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Ashwin Berry. He is a Namibian-based multidisciplinary artist and activist whose work is steeped in a millennial Pan-Africanism, Afrofuturism, human connection, and equality. He expresses his creativity as a spoken word poet, playwright, director, nominated actor, writer, platform creator, MC, and musician. Driven by the love of creative expression, Berry has founded and currently directs several local art spaces aimed at empowering independent artists in Namibia. Some of these platforms include The Gathering Namibia, Open Mic Namibia, and Afro Blooming Festival. Now, I just want to make sure with our host, we are going to be, and the host is going to share a video of Ashwin Berry. And I hope you enjoy it. And please let the questions come. We will give you an opportunity to ask it, and I will relate it after the video of Ashwin. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Ashwin Berry. I'm an MC and multidisciplinary artist, and I'll be sharing some poetry with you today. 2 poems in particular. One of them is going to be speaking about the environment, and the second one is about love. Goes like this. To be African is to know that the sun is not selfish with her time, that she can love us to a fault, and so the moon must step in to teach her restraint, whilst teaching us to pay attention to the tides and the signs in the times. The rain comes and goes as it pleases. Sometimes it's here for a day, other times for a season. We only really have control over ourselves and how we choose to be living. Yes, the heavens listen. Musikawanu knows, and our ancestors will never cease to guide our spirits. For long the elders have said, we must take time to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of our kindred. Learn and teach the right lessons, especially when navigating uncertain times. Avoid spreading false information, because a season of harsh truths trumps getting joy from convenient lies. And the truth in this time is that we must make peace with staying apart and staying inside. Yes, our strength and pride is in community. And although we can't commune like how it used to be, we can keep the love alive whilst maintaining 6 feet. See, love is a vibration that social distancing should not need to deplete. So let's follow the health guidelines and help keep each other alive. Practicing togetherness does not mean we need to gather or be outside. To be African, it means that we can't wait to be outside, because we know that shared experiences are the spice of life. We know that when we sing and dance together, we can bring down the rain, ignite the night, and outlive the sun. Those days will come. But for now, stay inside, sanitize. The second poem is, like I said, about love, and it goes like this. How do you enter my life and give me more than I thought existed? A whole new wish list, a whole new mission. Manufacturing joy whenever I'm in your company. You're loving me and it's making me want more from me, just so I can match your glory. Just to show me that you never leave me be. I don't have enough J in me to make me cheat, but I do believe. I believe that the divine feminine in you pushes me through the muddy waters of my toxic masculinity. So when they throw hate, your love is still within me, still beneath skin deep, still like peace. And I don't want a piece, I want the whole cake. I want to consume you after I taste. And when they make haste to comment on my weight, I'll simply say, she's my sugar. And myself is devoted to decoding every syllable of your love language. Ella es mi azúcar. I can't help but learn to speak Spanish just so I can describe your beauty in more ways than one. You are too captivating for me to be drawn to anyone else's words, actions, and need to stay relevant. I'm too zoned in on you to avoid being present. That said, I should probably mention that if anyone steps up in your space tempering with your tempo, they should consider their transgression the equivalent of trying to defile holy ground, and I will not stand for that ish. I'm a black man about the land, so you already know what it is. And I'm planting seeds of infinity in your heart because I want you to love me forever.
Thank you. It is finished. I think it is finished if the video stopped. This is now the end of the 3 presentations by the panelists, and we were nicely entertained by the artist. It is now time that we can ask the panelists a few questions. So I'm going to address the first question to Prof. Sarala. Prof. Sarala, one of the attendees asked a question. She says, thank you for the excellent presentation. You made mention of the hegemony of the language of the dominant groups, which disadvantage the San people. The participant asked, can you please give a specific example of these hegemonic language groups?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think this is a very important question, particularly in linguistics and applied linguistics. If you look at Namibia, 60% of the population are Oshiwambo speakers and 11% of the population are Oshi-Herero speakers. And these are the two dominant linguistic groups in Namibia. You have the other groups, but these are two dominant ones. And of course, because of this, there is in fact, the Oshiwambo language has got 6 dialects, and of the 6 dialects, the Oshi-Kwanyama and Oshi-Donga are the 2 dialects that are actually taught at school level. So Oshi-Herero, Oshi-Kwanyama, Oshi-Donga are languages which are taught at primary school level, and you also do your research in these languages at UNAM. If you take the San group of languages, you find that the Jutwanzi is the dominant language. And the Jutwanzi, again, is a language which is used as a medium of instruction in the schools in the Chumkwe region. And Chumkwe region is where you have the largest concentration of the San people. And so you have Jutwanzi, which is taught at school, and therefore it is not endangered. And this is the point that I was trying to make, because if you look at Ethnologue, Kung is not even listed as a language. And you must remember that these 6-7 languages, the San languages, they're not dialects. They're not like the Oshiwambo dialects. These are languages, so they're mutually unintelligible. And because of which it becomes a big challenge, because now you have Jutwanzi in Chumkwe, which is taught to all the San kids. And if you go to Corridor 17 and 18, there was a school there with 150 Kung children, and they were being taught in Oshi-Herero, not in Kung, because there are no textbooks, there are no teachers, there is nothing, there is no way to teach them Kung. And as I mentioned, there were only two people who knew the orthography of the Kung language. So it's very sad, but it is something that we need to do. We have to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope the question is answered. Thank you. I believe it is. There's another question that Dr. Mateo asked all presenters, and Dr. Mateo asked, how can we use modern science and technology to promote African indigenous languages in teaching, learning, and research of African indigenous knowledge systems? So, Jess, Dr. Jess, I know you've answered, but perhaps you can just quickly again say, answer your question, and then I will give the other panelists an opportunity to perhaps add something. Jess? Are you with me, Jess?
Yes, sorry, I was having difficulties with my mic. Thank you. I think that in terms of how to engage students with, let's call it non-colonial languages, it can be very productive to expose students far more to intellectual interventions that happen in these languages. And one of the things that I found productive in my teaching is, for almost every course, I'll assign a text in Amharic or in Kung, or even in Hindi, for example, a text that comes in a language that students can't usually access very easily, and assign for them a project where they have to go and find out how to enter into that text and how to really think about languages and what's limited when they only speak 1 or 2. And I found that what that does, in addition to helping students understand the content of whatever's being described, it also gets them curious. What do we only know if we speak 1 or 2 languages? And I think this is especially significant for people who only speak English, because there's often an assumption that if you speak English, you can reach the world. And of course you can't. You understand only a tiny, tiny fraction of knowledge that's out there. So through really exposing students to texts, to oral histories, to people who have a huge amount to share with the world that doesn't happen through these dominant languages that are very closely linked to empire, capitalism, extraction, you're then able to really open up their own awareness of how little they know. And for me, that awareness of ignorance is a very important starting point for all of us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jess. I think the next question that I have here, perhaps Prof. Sinfree, because it links a little bit with teaching and learning. Prof. Sinfree, you've talked about analyzing the communications and the intergenerational communication, but a question that I received was, do you know of any information that was, and I know you spoke about the communication structure, the layman's term or the heavy technical terms that were used, but do you know of any information that was translated, that was given to people in their own languages? If you know about that, and perhaps Jess, you would more know about our South African, you can perhaps add, and definitely Prof. Sarala, if you know of anything that was translated, that the information was translated. Prof. Sinfree, do you know of any?
I don't know about any information that was translated specifically for the
And Prof. Sinfree, we lost your sound.
Let me see. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I don't know any information which was translated into African languages which is pertinent to COVID-19. But I know that there is a lot of information which was translated during the time when the HIV/AIDS pandemic was still rampant in South Africa. That in conjunction with some people at the University of Cape Town, we were analyzing how the elderly individuals understood the text when they were translated into local varieties of indigenous languages. That is, that information is there. What is clear from that body of evidence, which we can use to extrapolate and make sense of the situation now, is that you can't assume that one generation will interpret the same text as another generation. So you're likely to have intergenerational differences in the interpretation of the same text, right? So that is absolutely important to understand, that people may interpret and hear the same text, but make sense of it radically differently. Linked to that, I think, is the key thing that as these discussions about COVID-19 language, etc., begin to expand, we need to think very carefully and critically at the way we deploy terms like whether it's colonial, indigenous, hegemonic, etc. All those sets of terms belong to a particular type of linguistics, right? They belong to what I call in my recent writing a decontextualized, institutionalized extension of Western metalinguistic discourses. They don't describe the actual reality. They describe a thinking language. So it is important for us to realize that there are many different ways of thinking about language. And the way we are talking about them, whether they are endangered or they are not here, they're indigenous here, is one way of thinking about language. The important thing which COVID-19 poses for us is, what are the other competing ways of thinking about language which we don't bring to the surface?
Prof. Sinfree, yes, thank you for that answer. I would like you to just repeat, because I really want to hear what you say. You look at language as a decontextualized?
No. I'm saying that I I don't look, okay, let me frame it carefully. Linguistics tends to look at language in some cases as a decontextualized form. And the problem that this has created is that we have begun to buy in unintentionally into some of the meta categories that are used in linguistics, like that this language is endangered, this language does not appear on this particular thing, it's indigenous, it's colonial. I'm saying that all that set of categories, all that universe belongs to a particular type of linguistics. So the important question to ask is this, is whether that type of linguistics is the one that is most appropriate problem that we are faced with now, as opposed to assuming that because there is a discourse about endangerment, therefore we automatically think that is what we should be using. My question is that the way of thinking that we want to bring to bear to this particular problem? And my answer at the moment is no.
Okay, yes, yes. Thank you for that. Prof. Sarala, just to make sure and to carry on with that question, do you know of any translated material on the content of COVID-19? Was there anything translated in Namibia?
We have our local newspapers, the Namibian, which has got an Oshimambo section and an Oshihirero section. So I would assume that there are articles written about COVID-19 because it is such an important topic. But I cannot speak to it because I don't know those two languages. That's the first thing. But I must also mention the fact that we must remember that even German and Afrikaans are the two languages of Namibia. And of course, you have the German and the Afrikaans newspapers in which we have information which is written, which is given in those languages. So I think I'll stop there. I would like to also kind of support what Professor Makoni has said. I think we use Western epistemological constructs to evaluate African traditions, African culture. And it is time that we start, we turn the gaze and we look at our own African traditions and culture in terms of our African knowledge systems and indigenous knowledge systems. And this is what I suppose people call that decolonization of knowledge. Maybe that's what it is. Thank you.
Yes. What it means, therefore, is that if you're going to, whether you call it decolonizing knowledge, etc., what you need to decolonize linguistics itself. You should not assume that linguistics provides you with natural categories. It provides you with a very specific way of thinking, which is Western in orientation, which is presented as if it is universal. And once you realize that my solutions may not lie with using linguistics, this type of linguistics. And we create our own linguistics to address our own problems that we encounter.
Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yes, and it's lovely to see from your two perspectives that you actually agree on that, and I can understand what you mean. Thank you very much. There's another question that I think perhaps, Jess, perhaps you could answer. Did you find, I think it was actually sorry, Prof. Sarala, it might be yours. I see it's just next to, under your name. Did you find experiences of a more or less similar disease that in the past disseminated the socioeconomic fabric of indigenous communities like COVID-19 did? And what was the name of that virus, if any? Were there before?
Yes, I think that's an easy one. Everybody knows about HIV and AIDS. And HIV and AIDS in 2000 and 2002, 2003 was nearly 51% in Namibia. And because of a lot of intervention, now it has come down and it's dropped down to about 25, 26%. But yes, HIV and AIDS was there, but I will not be able to tell you what is the the local name or the whether what is it translated into. I won't be able to tell you that because that's really not my area of interest. Yes, but definitely HIV and AIDS continues to be a big problem even today.
Yes, thank you. I was just now thinking something that Prof. Sinfrey said and your answer, that one can perhaps also look at the metaphors that are used to describe pandemics, because I know we've got a student at Northwest University that looked into the metaphors that's used to inform people on HIV and AIDS. And I think we can have a parallel idea on or look into a parallel little research project to see what metaphors do people use. Is it close to them? Is it foreign? Is it far away? Right. The next one, Dr. Jess, someone asks, I feel like a television host, a host of a program. Dr. Jess, I would like to hear from you. What can lecturers do? Oh, we've got that one, right? What can lecturers do to keep students engaged and support students linguistically during this time of COVID? What I can indicate is that a team of multilingual pedagogists training lecturers from different faculties to teach using the students' languages as resources to access knowledge. I invite you to join the team. So there's an existing team. I'm one of the team members. Her name is Dolly Dlavane. Currently, colleagues are anxious, and it's always encouraging to hear that there are still colleagues who recognize the importance of students' language in teaching and learning. So that comes from Dr. Dolly Dlavane. And Jess, I know you've touched on this already. Perhaps you can say something more on that. And perhaps just to add a sense of the student voice, in this as well.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's a lovely question. I've been thinking a lot about precisely that in preparing for teaching in the next term. And one of the things I love about Zoom is the simultaneous chat function. At Northwest University, most of the students are not first language English speakers, and yet most of the texts that we assign are in English. And so what we've already found in anthropology is often students are too shy to say that they don't know a particular piece of technical language, or there might be some concept that they're struggling with. But one can use the chat function on Zoom with a bit of encouragement. Students, they sometimes need a little motivating, but really encourage students to support one another and to say that in the kind of world we live in right now, multilingualism is a key workplace skill. It really, really matters for success. And if we encourage students to support one another by saying, for example, I don't understand the word heteronormativity. Can somebody explain this to me in Setswana or in Afrikaans? We find it really balances the power dynamics in the classroom, and it allows students to help one another in very, very powerful ways. And I think this ties in a bit to the earlier discussion around translation. I think we also can't afford to discount social media. So what's been missing for me in this whole dialogue so far is, what about TikTok? How are our students, how are many people around the world communicating through social media, through online platforms that sometimes have subtitles, but often invent whole processes of language through hashtags, for example, that are very much localized, but also transnational. And I think taking these the social media phenomenon very, very seriously helps us understand how young people, but older folk as well, how everybody communicates now. And that seems a really important linguistic, technological, and social piece of our current strategy to really pay attention to. And I think the more we can bring Twitter into the classroom, the more we can bring WhatsApp and TikTok and all the other emerging platforms into our classrooms, the more we engage with students in the reality that they already live in. Because I found even in that previous lifetime where we would give lectures, everybody's on their phone anyway. So we may as well use the phone in the classroom to make sure that the students are engaging with what we're saying by doing things like internet polls, or, everybody look up the Setswana word for this particular epistemological concept that we're talking about. So there's so much one can do if one thinks just a bit creatively, and also recognizes that in any given body of people, there's so much wisdom through the languages that we all speak. I bet that amongst this group of, 51 participants, we've probably got at least 51 languages. Now, imagine if all of that could be put on the table for us to think with, how much richer we would all be. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, I must come back on the screen. Yes, and I must listen to the tone. Jess, I can just nod my head on what you say. It is really, really important. And we all struggle with that same thing, yes. I perhaps just want to mention that there's one group of students that I'm involved with, and it's mainly students that I assumed would struggle to connect and to communicate. And I was amazed. I thought they would struggle, and somehow they just a 98.7% participation online, and they just, I don't know. I'm definitely going to think more on my communication with them, but they can actually do it. They are there, and we can just access them. Prof. Sinfree, I've got one more question for you. Someone asked, in terms of your analyses of communication, and specifically intergenerational communication, someone asked, can you please give an example to understand that better? How, if you can, just to illustrate that better, of the intergenerational gap, can I call it?
Yes, okay, let me give you an example. You have a grandparent interacting with their granddaughter. That would be an interesting example of what you can call an intergenerational communication. What tends to happen is that if they both live in the same household, they can adjust to each other's speech patterns. So the grandmother is able to appropriate ways of speaking that are associated with the youth. The youth is sensitized to the way of speaking as it is articulated by the grandmother. In other words, there's a way in which they accommodate to each other's speech patterns. This particular intergenerational model is important to bear in mind, because the tendency is to think of the youth as completely detached from other generations. Most of the young people that you either meet in class also do have intergenerational relations with people who belong to different generations. They don't just live amongst the youth themselves. They go back home and they live and discuss with their parents or with their grandparents. So understanding the nature of that intergenerational relationship is as important as understanding how the youth talk to each other amongst themselves. So you need a model that looks like this. You need an intergenerational model across generations. And you also need a model that then looks at intra-generational model communication. Communication within the same generations as opposed to communication across different generations. And it is the combination of inter and intra-generational communication that makes up the totality of the communicative repertoire of any individual African person.
Thank you, Prof. Sinfree. I actually received a follow-up question while you were answering. are you talking, if you look at that model, that inter and intra-generational model that you talk about, is your focus on content or language structure?
No, it's both. I don't draw distinctions between content and language structure. The two merge into one another. It is by trying to articulate language content that issues about language structure come up, and you use language structure to service to create language content.
Okay, yeah, thank you. The person is happy. I think we've got oh goodness, I received a follow-up question. Sorry, I just need to help this participant. Prof. Senfree, is there an example of this participant is really interested in your work. Is there an example of something that you can say, this is a typical older generation example and a typical younger generation example? If you think of the COVID disease now, what would a typical older person's language picture look like and versus a younger person?
Good. That's a very important question. I think the conceptual mistake which is made is that there are features of language which are unique and peculiar to the youth only. And then there are features of language which are unique and peculiar to the older generation. That is a mistake. You need to start from an assumption that if people are connected to each other, they will mutually influence one another, as opposed to thinking that because of their chronological age, there are certain linguistic features which are attached to them. That is not the case. If they share the same, if they're in the same platform, they are interacting and they've got similar concerns, they are likely to have a lot in common, right? So chronological age cannot be used as an indicator of the nature and type of language that you're going to use. There are older individuals who can speak like young people. There are young people who can speak like older individuals. But the bottom line is, don't use chronological aging as an index for linguistics.
I hear you. The participants, thank you, Prof. Senfree. I think she's happy now. I think we might have time.
Tell them to email me. If they email me, we can continue the conversation.
Thank you. Yes. I think we might have time for about 2 questions more. Let's see. This one is a question to Jess, please. In this time when so much of the communication and language, the discourse around the pandemic is wrought with negativity, how can we turn this around to reflect on the positive aspects of community and society? Can you speak to your research on writing in Africa in this sense? Is that fine, Jess? Thank you.
Sure, thanks. It's a really nice question. Yeah, so this is something I thought about a lot at the beginning of the pandemic. And if you Google Archive of Kindness in South Africa, you'll find an archive that we just moved house, it was complete chaos, and a new neighbor had, actually we couldn't move house. So we had a personal experience where we weren't able to move. And a random stranger took us into her house and said, you can stay in my place for the duration of lockdown. And that really got me thinking, how are South Africans supporting one another in this incredible moment of crisis? And so I started this archival project called the Archive of Kindness, which has recorded several hundred stories of everyday kindness across South Africa. And it's been used in all kinds of sort of global forum, because I think that people need stories of what's working. Exactly as you say, there's a lot of negativity, but negativity gets clicks online, and positivity is something we all need if we want to find a way to chart a different kind of future. So I'm going to be using that archive in the next 12 weeks with second-year anthropology students to build a different kind of platform of how we tell stories in South Africa. And what's happened is that people around the world doing similar work have been writing to me about those kinds of stories and those kinds of questions. So I know this is something that a lot of people are thinking about. And I guess we all have to decide, are we going to focus on all the horrendous stuff, which has to be focused on, of course, or are we going to try consciously to construct a narrative of empowerment? And I'm sure everybody on this call has seen the effect of that with students. If you tell them this is a disaster and their education is gone, then there's a lot of despair and sadness. Whereas if you say, oh, look, this is a chance for us to finally get right, things that 500 years of tertiary education never actually managed to crack, then suddenly it's a very different dialogue. And I'm really hoping that in the long run of the COVID pandemic and the many years that it will take us to respond to it, we're able as a nation to kind of find the ways in which the positive is actually offering us new solutions to problems that have been with us for a long time. We all know that 94 never brought the South African dream alive, but sometimes I feel like actually this might be the moment where people are seeing their neighbors in different ways. They're seeing the landscapes they live in. They're recognizing that many of the systems that we inherited from our history actually don't work. And in recognizing that and recognizing how people are responding, we're really finding an opportunity for something new. And so I hope that highlighting these stories and amplifying them becomes an important part of that process. So thanks.
Yes, it was really a lovely question, and thank you, such a lovely answer. I'm just looking at the time. Yes, we can do another one. Prof. Sarala, here comes a longer one. Let me just get it here for you. It's addressed to you. You raised ignorance and irresponsibility in your introduction as reasons for why people are not physically distancing. I'm not a language scholar, but do you think we perhaps, in English anyway, lack a vocabulary to describe behavior in terms other than internal individual states? It's likely that most people understand the reasons and the protocols for physical distancing, but are not in a position to act in terms of that knowledge. Perhaps Indigenous languages may offer a vocabulary that gets beyond this individual-centric language and that enables us to admit a picture of personhood beyond the individual in terms of which to explain such behavior in times like this. I know it's a long question. Did you get it, Prof. Sarala?
I get a sense of what the question is, and I will try and answer it in the way that I can. And I deliberately, in fact, when I was writing this paper, I looked at these three terms: ignorance, irresponsibility, and negligence. And I deliberately used these three words because one can forgive ignorance. People may not get the information and therefore they may not know, and they're ignorant, and therefore they make the mistake. They don't follow the protocols, they don't wash their hands, they don't sanitize, they don't maintain social distance. All that is fine. But what has happened now in Namibia, particularly in the past couple of weeks, and that's the reason why the president has reversed this decision, and we have gone back to stage 3, is because people have become careless and irresponsible. And this has got nothing to do with language. There were a few cases in Walvis Bay and Swakopmund, and now suddenly there is an increase in Windhoek, and these are places where we have educated people. It's not as if they don't know English, they don't know the language. And it is, it is splashed all over. I can just give an example. There is this person, and I wouldn't like to name him, but apparently he was asymptomatic, and he decided to go partying for 3 days. And he put it very boastfully on Facebook to say, I have COVID, I've tested COVID positive, but I've decided to party. So, those are the kind of challenges. And that's why I use the word irresponsible and negligent. If it is ignorance, it can be forgiven, but you cannot forgive irresponsible and negligent behavior. So that is one thing. And I would just like to speak a little bit about the Kum people, because finally that's what my talk is about. And, you know, if you talk about human behavior with the Kum people, they are people who are very, okay, I'm going to use a very colloquial expression. They're very touchy-feely, you know, they like to sit together, they like to eat together, there is a community feel. Everybody, if there is you know, they sit around the fire and they sit together. And so this whole concept of social distancing is something which is very alien to the San people. So we go back when we move into stage 4 and stage 5, we have to go back to the Kum and see how they are coping with this whole social distancing aspect of the COVID-19, because this is something that is unimaginable for them. But I cannot speak to that now because I don't know what's happening there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But while I have you there, I see we've got about just less than 10 minutes left. I caught a question that's also addressed to you, Prof. Sarala. I just want to get the gist of it. Let me read the whole thing. I'm interested in the connectivity between the community and the environment. Isn't this perspective of their indigenous knowledge systems anthropocentric? The traditional medicines in particular, they ask about, that's placing human beings at the center, where they simply use nature for their own benefit. To what extent do such traditional practices sustain the environment? Have these practices contributed in any way towards the COVID-19 problem? I think it comes from Dr. Pasi.
Okay, and it's an interesting question because on the one hand, we are talking about anthropocentrism, which is at the center of all our activities. I think even religion, you know, if you talk about religion, it's also anthropocentric. But if you look at the indigenous people, they do not divorce themselves from the environment. They are a part of the environment. They understand the environment. They're a part of the flora and the fauna. And as the example which I gave of the traditional healer is such an important example, because the point that I made earlier was the fact that, you know, the San people, yes, they go into the veld to collect herbs and medicinal plants, but they never over harvest. And that is because they respect the environment. They give the environment, they give the natural environment time to rejuvenate itself. And so therefore they don't think of themselves as superior, as separate. They are a part of nature. They are part of the flora and the fauna of the landscape. And therefore this question of anthropocentrism does not come into question when we talk about the San people. If I can just give a couple of more examples, you see, with they have, I could not describe too many of the rituals. You know, one of the rituals that they have is that when, for instance, a woman is menstruating, she will not pass under a certain tree, because they believe that it affects the tree, and if it affects the tree, then the tree will not grow. So there is a seamless relationship with the environment, with the animals. And as I said, they don't feel themselves separate from the environment. And you have, for instance, you know, this lady talked about how she could go and sleep through the night, and there would be lions roaming around her, and she never felt frightened. She never felt that the lions would attack her. So I think it is something that we can't even understand. We cannot fathom the depth of the knowledge. And I think it is our fault. I think we have not reached out enough. I think we come from such a superior attitude of we know everything, and we don't realize that there is so much knowledge that we cannot even fathom. We cannot even begin to fathom. And this is where I say that we have to go back to the indigenous knowledge. I don't know if I've answered the question at all. Thank you.
No, I think you have. I check the time quickly. There are 5 minutes left. I'm going to go to the other panelists now, but there's actually really for you another one here, and that is what interventions can be put in place to ensure that minority languages can be used to communicate important messages like this. So do you have a suggestion, perhaps, Prof. Sarala? I think Prof. Sinfree, you might also have a suggestion. I'll ask you after, Prof. Sarala. So what interventions can be put in place that minority languages can communicate this?
I think the very first and the most important intervention is the recognition. Because, as I said, if you go to the Namibian Statistics Agency website and you look for Namibian languages, indigenous languages, some of these languages don't even appear, And I can talk about Kung, I can talk about Shifwe, I can talk about Mbalantu, I can talk about Oludemba. There are so many languages which are there, and they don't even figure in the Namibian Statistics Agency. And if you look at the statistics on languages, they fall under other. There is a category which says other, and these languages fall under other languages. And so they're not even recognized as languages. So I think the very first thing that we need to do is researchers like us need to go into the field and find these people. And then we need to urge the government. There is advocacy. We need to urge the government to recognize the fact that there are these people and these are languages which need to be recognized, because once recognized, I can, if I have the time, I can give you a very interesting example. One of the other languages that we are studying is the Oludemba language. Now, Oludemba sits right in the middle. It's in the Ruacana region, and it sits right in the middle of Oshihirero on one side in Kunene, and Oshiwambo on the other side, which is the O regions. So it is a language which is endangered by the two majority language groups, and it is not even, as I said, it's not even recognized. The traditional chief was not even recognized by the government as a person who needs to be given certain certain powers. He wasn't even empowered, and it's only just last year, I think in 2019 in July, that the Oludemba group were recognized and the traditional chief was installed, and there was an investiture ceremony, and that particular group was recognized, and hopefully now there will be some recognition for the language. So this is what, if you're talking about intervention, the first thing that we need to do is we need to recognize that there are these languages, and the government will have to start including them as, they need to disaggregate these numbers, because only then will these languages survive.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you very much. I'm going to push the last 2 minutes. Prof. Sinfree, someone asks, what is your take of the government's use of military language in mitigating COVID-19? For example, it is a war that we need to fight. We shall win this war. Could governments avoid this militaristic language? And I think this links to the metaphor that I mentioned before, right? We cannot hear you, Prof. Sinfree.
Yes. I'm just working on a paper in which I explore the nature of the relationship between the securitization of language and issues about healthcare practices, drawing on some of the material from COVID-19, how the COVID-19 has tended to be framed in a militaristic way, as if it is an issue about security. So why this is interesting is that I think the person who is asking the question is right. What you are beginning to have there is a sense in which the discourse that comes from security, from the military, is repurposed, is redeployed, and it takes over the discourses of healthcare. The question that then arises is whether that actually benefits the individuals who are citizens in that country. Because once you are using discourses from security and the military, issues about rights can be compromised, right? So issues about healthcare can be dispensed with because you're now prioritizing aspects about security. Yes, I see the point. It is important to realize that governments do deploy securitized discourses in healthcare. But linked to that, my other point which I wanted to make also is that it's important to realize that there are two types of discourses that come up with COVID: utopian discourses and dystopian discourses. But there is one that is in between these discourses, that is the humor with which people are able to confront very difficult circumstances. So we must never underestimate how individuals are able to poke fun and laugh at the difficult situations that they are in. Right, so they try and confront these dystopian discourses using humor. Then my last comment about minority languages, etc. I'm a bit uncomfortable saying that somebody's language is a minority language. From that individual's perspective, even if your language is only spoken by 4 or 5 people, you are the center of that universe. So that language cannot be a minority, right? Because you are the centerpiece of that world, right?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you to all 3 our panelists, and thank you to all the participants for your lovely and interesting questions. I think it was a lovely afternoon and a lovely webinar. I would like to introduce Dr. Esti Jordan to all of you, and she's going to do the closing remarks. Dr. Esti Jordan is Director of the School of Languages at the Northwest University. Her research focuses on the use of eye tracking technology to study aspects of subtitling, reading, attention allocation, and processing effort. She's published mainly on the reading of first and second language subtitles in multilingual South African contexts, and is involved in projects on the use of subtitles in classrooms and educational contexts, and investigations on reading behavior. She's a member of UPSET, the research focus area, understanding and processing language in complex settings. Esti, for our closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Anneke, and thank you, firstly, a vote of thanks to all the wonderful panelists. I think this has been a lovely, rich and diverse webinar this afternoon, and well, afternoon to us here in South Africa. There's so much to be said and so much to be done and so much to be explored. I think as much as we are in a difficult situation and we recognize the severity of this pandemic, I think what is very, very clear is that for a long time to come, there's a lot of linguistic related research to be done from the pandemic that we're in, not only linguistic related, sociological, anthropological. There's so much to be learned from the situation that we're in, tying in with the fact that that language is diverse, communication is diverse. It's not just a singular thing, and there's so much that brings us together as a society and as societies and as regions. So thank you very much to the panelists for sharing your insights with us this afternoon. Thank you very much to all the participants for staying with us. If I counted correctly, I think at some point we were 52. I think we've lost a few people towards the end here, but we had participants from Germany, from India, from Namibia. In South Africa, we have participants from the University of Pretoria, from UJ, from the University of Cape Town, and of course from Northwest University, and many others. And thank you to our colleagues and our scholars from UST for sharing in this event. This has really been a lovely afternoon. I got lost in the conversations and listening to all the wonderful insights that have been shared. I do think that, and perhaps some of the the technical team can just confirm for us. Yeah, I do believe that if people are interested in taking the conversations further, that there is opportunity to do this via email with some of the panelists and some of the people that have shared their insights today. I think people can share their email addresses in the chat box. Am I correct? Yes. Okay. So again, thank you to everyone for attending today. Thank you for our wonderful panelists, Prof. Krishnamurti, Dr. Jess Auerbach, Prof. Sinfri Makoni, and to Mr. Ashwin Berry for the wonderful poetry, for the wonderful presentation, for entertaining us. We as the Faculty of Humanities and all researchers and all scholars in the field of humanity, I think, have benefited tremendously from this webinar today. And I think this is a wonderful seminar series. And I think this is also one of the wonderful things that have come from this pandemic, is that we have the opportunity to engage as scholars and as co-participants in this event and in this pandemic. And we're all in this together. And we all have experiences, and we can all reflect on these experiences, I think, for years and years to come. So thank you again from my side and from all of us, and have a wonderful afternoon.